The Kronos Institute for Strategic Command had been training fleet officers for 210 years. It sat in permanent orbit above a dead moon in the Outer Haven system, a station built specifically because nothing distracted from the work there. No traffic, no weather, no skyline to look at instead of the problem in front of you. Its acceptance rate was under 2%, lower than any command academy in the coalition. Its graduation rate was 58%, and of those who graduated, fewer than a third were ever cleared for temporal tactics certification. The Institute's rarest and most contested honor, awarded to officers judged capable of commanding a fleet through a battle whose outcome could still be altered by the choices made inside it. In 210 years, the Institute had produced 411 certified officers. 11 had gone on to command entire fleets. 3 had names that were still taught in the first-year history block, not because they had won famous battles, but because they had prevented ones that would have been unwinnable. In 210 years, only 9 humans had been accepted. 4 had graduated. None had ever been certified. The current class had 1 human in it. The Institute did not build its reputation on its lecture halls, its uniforms, or its long ceremonial hallways lined with the portraits of admirals who had once been cadets in this same building. It built its reputation on a single chamber, 3 decks below the main concourse, that had swallowed the confidence of cadets for over 2 centuries. The cadets called it the Meridian. Officially, it was Strategic Scenario 41, a battle problem set on a collapsing timeline, in which every decision a cadet made altered the sequence of events that followed, and every alteration had to be tracked, corrected, and accounted for before the simulation reached a stable end state. It had been designed, according to the original engineering notes still archived in the Institute's records, to be unsolvable in under 40 attempts. This was not an oversight. It was the point. The Meridian did not exist to test whether a cadet could win. It existed to test what a cadet did after they had already lost, how quickly they could read the shape of their own failure and correct for it before the timeline collapsed entirely. The record, held for 81 years by an admiral whose statue stood in the East Atrium, was 31 attempts. No cadet in the recorded history of the Institute had ever beaten it in fewer than 20. Ren Akafer was 23, from a mining colony on the outer edge of the Perseda Belt, a place with no atmosphere of its own, and a population that measured its year not in seasons but in tunnel collapse cycles. He had submitted an application file that his admissions officer, a Threnal administrator named Kest Ambar, had read 3 times, not because the file was impressive, but because the third reading was the only one where the numbers stopped looking like a transmission error. His tactical assessment scores were not simply high. They were calibrated against a scoring model that had never in the Institute's history produced a result in that percentile bracket, which meant the model itself had to be pulled and re-verified by a second office before the Institute would accept the submission as genuine data rather than a corrupted file. The verification took 11 days. It came back confirmed, unchanged, twice. Ren had not mentioned any of this when he arrived. He stepped off the transport shuttle carrying a single duffel bag and nothing else, found his assigned quarters without asking for directions, and unpacked in under 6 minutes. On the shelf above his bunk he set a small brass pocket chronometer, an old analog piece, clearly non-regulation, the kind of object nobody else on the station would recognize the value of. It had belonged to his grandfather, a tunnel foreman who had taught 3 generations of miners that instruments lied about pressure long before pressure became visible, and that the only clock worth trusting was the one you kept in your own hands. He reported to orientation on time, said his name and his colony of origin when asked, and when Instructor Ambar pressed him gently, curiously, on what he intended to specialize in, Ren said only strategy. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. He was quiet in the particular way that made people assume there was nothing underneath the quiet a mistake, though an understandable one. His eyes did not change expression based on what was happening around him. They changed only based on what he was thinking, which meant that to a room full of cadets trained to read faces for social information, Ren often looked like he wasn't thinking anything at all. In a class of 30 who spent their evenings performing confidence at each other in the mess hall, Ren simply worked. He ran the training modules twice as often as required, not because he was struggling, but because he treated repetition the way his grandfather had treated a tunnel survey, as due diligence, not as doubt. By the end of the first month, none of the instructors had flagged him for anything except being, in Kest Ambar's private notes, unusually difficult to read, in a way that suggests there is quite a lot to read. The challenge came in the officers' mess, 6 weeks into the term, during the evening period when rank became informal and conversation became a weapon disguised as small talk. It was, by design and by long tradition, the only hour of the day when a fourth-year cadet could say something to a first-year cadet that would never appear in any official record, and both of them knew it. Cadet Vale Osirin was a threnil, tall and sharp-eyed, with the kind of feathered crest that shifted color faintly with mood, though Vale had trained himself years ago to keep it flat and unreadable in public. He was in his 3rd year, ranked first in the class, and the only cadet in a decade to clear the meridian in under 25 attempts, a record he had earned honestly, through 11 months of obsessive iteration, and one he was, reasonably, proud of. Vale introduced the human question the way that certain cadets introduce questions, which is to say, with the timing and tone of someone who had prepared it, who had, in fact, been waiting for the right evening, the right audience, the right moment when the mess hall was full enough to matter and informal enough to allow it. Aether, Vale set down a data tablet with the deliberate care of someone building an audience, not consulting a document. Out of curiosity, how many attempts did the meridian take you? Several cadets at the nearby tables went quiet in the particular way that meant they were listening without appearing to. A few of them smiled, the category of smile that appears in rooms where a hierarchy is being enforced, and everyone present has already decided which side of it they're standing on. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of people who believed, sincerely, that they already knew how this would end. Commander Yeva Solt, seated at the head of the instructor's table on the far side of the hall, said nothing. She did not look up from her meal, but she had been waiting for this exact question since the 2nd week of term, when she had pulled Ren's simulation logs on a hunch, read them twice, and then read the timestamp a 3rd time because she genuinely had not believed it. Ren looked up from his tray unhurried. "That's a fair question," he said, in the tone of someone who genuinely found it fair, not defensive, not wary, simply engaged. "Are you asking about the full run count, or just the clean solve?" Vale's smile widened by a fraction, the fraction of someone who believes the trap has already sprung shut. "The full run, however many tries it took you." Ren considered this for a moment, the way a person considers a question they haven't been asked before, not because it's difficult, but because he genuinely hadn't thought about it since it happened. "1," he said. The mess hall did not go loud. It went silent, the way a wave stops, the tables closest to Vale first, then spreading outward table by table until even cadets who hadn't heard the exchange found themselves lowering their voices, because the room itself had changed shape around them. Vale's smile did not move immediately. It took a second to catch up to what had been said, the way an expression sometimes lags behind the sentence that broke it. "1 attempt," Vale repeated, not a question. A recalculation, spoken aloud because there was nowhere else for it to go. "The first one," Ren said. "I didn't run it again after. There wasn't anything left to test." Somewhere at a far table, a cadet laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, quickly smothered by the cadet next to her. The record was 31 attempts, set by an admiral whose statue 3 decks up still had fresh flowers left at its base every year by graduating classes. The best cadet in a decade had needed 24 tries to beat it. The idea that a first-term human, 6 weeks into his career, had cleared the meridian clean, no failed run to learn its shape from first, was not a claim a room like this simply accepted on a Threnel's report of a conversation. "That's not possible," Vale said, and for the first time the prepared tone slipped entirely, replaced by something closer to genuine, unguarded confusion. "The scenario regenerates its own timeline based on your decisions. Every branch reroutes around what you've already done wrong. Nobody solves it clean. You have to fail first, or you never learn the shape of the trap." "I know how it's built," Ren said. "I didn't fail first." He picked his tray back up, apparently considering the conversation finished from his end, and at the head table, Commander Solt, still silent, still not looking up, allowed herself the smallest motion of setting down her fork. Solt did not let it end there. She never intended to. The next morning's tactics seminar was moved, without prior announcement, from the standard lecture hall to the simulation deck itself. 30 cadets filed in expecting a review of fleet formation doctrine, and found instead a full holographic pull-up of Scenario 41's official archived logs, restricted files, cleared only for instructor-level review, now projected floor to ceiling across the entire chamber wall. "Since we were discussing records last night," Solt said, not raising her voice, "let's discuss records properly, with data." The footage was not dramatic in the way the Institute's ordinary training simulations were dramatic, all flashing threat indicators and synthetic urgency. It was documentary. Time-stamped decision trees, branching and collapsing in real time, each node annotated with the scenario's own internal confidence score for every choice a cadet made. Most cadets' historical runs, when pulled up beside each other, looked like a forest fire, dozens of branches lighting and extinguishing across the timeline, false starts, dead ends, backtracking visible as jagged retreats in the data. Ren's run, pulled up beside them, looked like a single unbroken line. "Case 1, Solt said, isolating the first major decision node. "Standard opening. 91% of cadets in this institute's recorded history commit the frontline squadron here on the first contact signal." Aether held it back 3 full moves before the system's own predictive model flagged the ambush that would have destroyed it. Vale, seated near the front, was not smiling anymore. He was watching with the expression of someone doing a calculation that was clearly going to take longer than the seminar period allotted for it. "Case 2. Solt advanced the log. The false retreat at hour 6. The scenario is specifically engineered to punish cadets for reading it as a genuine withdrawal. 11 cadets this decade, including 2 who went on to graduate with honors, have lost the entire simulation at exactly this point, because they pursued." A pause, precise. Aether reinforced instead of pursuing. He reinforced before the retreat was even flagged as false by the scenario's own combat AI, which does not officially confirm the deception until 40 seconds after Aether had already committed to the correct response. Case 3. A supply line feint that had ended 8 prior cadet runs by hour 9. Ren had rerouted 2 full squadrons around it without ever triggering the scenario's warning threshold. Case 4. A communications blackout event, engineered to force cadets into a decision blind, without full battlefield visibility. The average cadet response time under blackout conditions was, according to the Institute's own statistics, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Ren's logged response time was 11 seconds. By the 5th case study, the chamber had gone fully silent, not the tense, performative silence of the mess hall the night before, but something quieter, closer to genuine attention. By the 8th, Vale had stopped taking notes entirely, his stylus resting untouched on the console in front of him. "Case 9, Solt continued, and this was the one she had saved. "The command structure collapse. This is the scenario's true test, not whether you can survive the battle, but whether you can end it before it becomes a war of attrition neither side can win cleanly. The average successful run reaches this stage at roughly the 90-minute mark, with substantial losses already incurred. Aether reached it at minute 41. She let the number sit in the room, with 0 unit losses recorded. Case 10. Her voice did not change register, but something in the room did. There is no case 10. The simulation ended at minute 41, case 9, because there was nothing left in the scenario for Aether to solve. I have run this institute for 11 years, Commander Solt said, into the silence that followed. I have reviewed every cadet log this chamber has produced in that time, and several decades of archived logs besides. This is the first clean solve in the recorded history of Scenario 41. Not the fastest, not the most efficient, the first clean solve. She let that finish landing before she added, quieter, almost to herself. The admiral who set the previous record needed 31 attempts to learn what Cadet Aether apparently already knew walking in. Ren did not speak during any of it. He sat near the back of the chamber, the small brass chronometer visible at his wrist. He had started wearing it instead of leaving it on the shelf, a habit from home, a way of tracking real elapsed time against the compressed, elastic time of a simulation that could stretch a second of decision-making into a full minute of consequence, and watched the footage with the same level, unhurried attention he gave to everything. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the expression of someone quietly confirming that what he remembered doing matched what the record now showed the room he had done it. After the seminar broke and the rest of the class filed out in a murmur that hadn't fully found its footing yet, Vale lingered by the door. He didn't approach immediately. When he finally did, there was no performance left in his posture at all. The prepared, deliberate tone from the mess hall was gone entirely, replaced by something quieter and considerably more honest. You held the front line back 3 moves early, Vale said, before the system flagged the ambush. I've run that exact scenario 9 times, and I still don't see it coming until the flag's already active. I grew up on a mining colony, Ren said. You learn to read a tunnel collapse before the sensors do, or you don't grow up at all. It's the same shape of problem underneath. Pressure changes before the instruments notice it changing. The Meridian's ambush trigger works the same way. The enemy has to commit resources to set it up, and that commitment shows in the supply data 3 moves before the strike itself does. The scenario doesn't hide that. It just buries it under enough noise that nobody looks. Vale absorbed that for a long moment, his crest shifting faintly, a color he clearly hadn't meant to show. I've spent 3 years assuming the ambush was unreadable until it triggered. I built my entire approach around reacting to it fast, not seeing it early. You're looking at what the enemy is doing, Ren said, without any edge to it. I was looking at what the ground was about to let them do. It's a different question. Most people never think to ask it because the scenario's dressed up to look like it's testing reaction speed. It isn't. It's testing whether you're reading the right layer. Vale nodded slowly, not quite agreement, more the visible motion of someone updating a framework that had held steady for 3 full years and had just, without warning, been shown its edge. The frontier record and the actual record are going to be different by 1 clean solve now, he said. That's going to take the rest of the class a while to get used to, myself included. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to, and to his credit, he didn't pretend otherwise. He turned and left the chamber without another word, the door sliding shut behind him quietly enough that it barely registered as an exit at all. No scene, no lingering resentment on display, just a cadet walking out with a slightly different understanding of the world than the one he'd walked in with. Ren gathered his tablet and the small chronometer from the console where he'd set it down and started toward the exit. Commander Solt was waiting by the door, arms folded, the restricted files still glowing faintly on the chamber wall behind her, Case 9 still frozen mid-collapse on the display. You didn't tell anyone, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Nobody asked until yesterday. Vale's going to spend the next month trying to figure out how you read that ambush 3 moves early. A pause, something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth. So will I, honestly, if I'm being fully accurate about it. Ren turned the chronometer over once in his palm, an old analog piece from a colony where clocks still had to be wound by hand, where a child learned early that instruments lied about pressure long before pressure ever became visible on a readout, and that the only clock worth fully trusting was the one you kept in your own hands. The scenario doesn't punish you for being wrong, he said. It punishes you for needing to be shown that you're wrong before you'll believe it. I just didn't need to be shown. Salt studied him for a moment in the low light of the chamber, then opened her tablet and pulled up his cadet performance file. The same file her predecessor, Kest Ambar, had flagged for a second verification pass 6 weeks earlier. The same numbers that had needed 3 separate readings before anyone on staff had been willing to believe they weren't a transmission error.